Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hello and welcome everyone to our forum webinar series. I'm Jim Lindberg, Senior Policy Director at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Today we actually have participants joining us from here in the US as well as other countries around the globe. So a special thanks to any of you who are joining from more distant time zones where it may either be very late or perhaps very early in your day. We appreciate it. Again, as you join, please drop a note in the chat and tell us where you're calling in from. It's fun to see. A reminder that this webinar is made possible by members of the National Trust Preservation Leadership Forum. That's our professional membership program, and we really appreciate all of the PLF members who are with us today. Our webinar today is part of a three-part summer series on the Heritage Now campaign, which is a collaboration among heritage organizations and advocates around the globe to advance heritage-informed decarbonization strategies that connect climate action, cultural heritage, and community resilience. So for today's webinar, we're going to provide an introduction and an overview of what the Heritage Now campaign is all about, how it came together, what activities are underway and planned for the future, and importantly, how you can be a part of it. Before we begin, though, I want to just share a few technical logistics. So we will take questions from all of you in the audience. Send your questions using the Q&A chat, and then directly to the panelists. And you can submit those questions anytime. We'll be waiting, of course, till the end in the Q&A section to answer those questions, but send them in at any point as they strike you during the webinar. Also, feel free to use the chat to share and communicate with everybody else, all the participants, using the chat function. The closed captioning function is enabled for this webinar. You can either enable it or disable it through the controls at the bottom of your Zoom screen or through your audio settings, depending on what version of Zoom you're using. And then quick reminder that yes, we will be sending out a recording of today's webinar directly to your email, the one you used to register. And all of our forum webinars, including this one, are available or will be available on the National Trust YouTube channel. So encourage you to take a look at that and to share it with others who you think might be interested in it after today. And then finally, just a reminder, everybody, asking you to be respectful of each other in the chat and follow our code of conduct. All right. So next, just wanted to give you a preview of what we have planned, which is a great lineup of speakers who are going to provide an overview of the Heritage Now campaign, including a just released new toolkit, very exciting, and give us some flavor for how heritage organizations and advocates are implementing heritage-informed decarbonization strategies in countries around the world. And so to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Ferriss. And Lori's just been such a great champion for this campaign and for heritage as a climate solution globally. And for those of you who don't know Lori, she's the co-founder and executive director of the Built Buildings Lab. She has a background spanning architecture, engineering, preservation, and sustainability. And her work, which has been recognized around the world, focuses on leveraging existing and historic buildings for a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. Delighted to have Lori with us. Lori?
All right. Thanks so much, Jim. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. Get my slides. Yes. First, I just want to start by thanking the National Trust for joining us as partners in this campaign. And I can't see all of you participants, but I'm sure there are many of you who have been with us for a year and a half as we've developed this project. So thank you to everyone who's contributed. I'm really excited to talk you all through the Heritage Now campaign and the project behind it, decarbonizing the built environment through heritage. And as Jim already mentioned, what we're here to talk about is the potential of our built heritage to provide really essential solutions to address the climate crisis. And I think this is a shift from a lot of the narrative that we've experienced, which is that our cultural heritage is vulnerable and at risk due to climate change, which is true. But how do we actually start to think about the flip side of that, which is that we have also embedded within our heritage a tremendous toolkit of solutions that we can deploy? And I want to start by stepping back a minute and asking to start with why do we need these heritage solutions in the first place? What are we trying to address? And really, what we're trying to address are the environmental impacts of the built environment that are contributing quite substantially to the climate crisis. Our built environment is responsible for over about 42% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. We about 40%, over 40% of the raw materials we extract from the earth go into our built environment. And at the same time, the built environment generates about a third of all solid waste. So there's a big impact from the built environment, which causes, feeds into the climate crisis. But at the same time, this provides a massive opportunity within the built environment, and particularly an opportunity for the places and the knowledge and the practices held within heritage. So this was really the premise of our project, Decarbonizing the Built Environment Through Heritage, which is a project through the Climate Heritage Network and led by Built Buildings Lab with our partners at University of Lagos and Architecture 2030 and the National Trust. And DBTH, this project, has three primary aims to really help accelerate policy solutions for built environment decarbonization. And the first is to prepare advocates from within the heritage sector to bring this knowledge into policy spaces. So that's really at the heart of this campaign. We're also aiming to elevate all of the solutions, all of the demonstrations of heritage-informed approaches to decarbonization that exist in cultures, in communities all around the world. And then lastly, to help empower those communities to tell their stories and to really tie the impact of their work into climate policy conversations. And so one of the first things that we want to do is really define what are we talking about when we say heritage solutions to decarbonization or to climate. So this we're putting forward a new term here called heritage informed decarbonization. And this is really kind of broadly speaking, all of the solutions that apply the tangible and intangible heritage, the wisdom, the practices, and the places of the past to help minimize greenhouse emissions now and into the future. And this spans a lot of different types of solutions that include knowledge about how to build and live in buildings in a way that's responsive to the local climate context, that teach us how to adapt to the climate, how to use local materials that are repairable and durable, and how to cultivate, cultures of care and maintenance within our built environment, and how to kind of pass down this knowledge from generation to generation. So we're talking about the material scale up to the urban scale, and we're talking again about both tangible and intangible heritage approaches. And we wanted to understand what does this really look like? As Jim mentioned, this is really a global project. So we wanted to look around the world and ask, what does heritage-informed decarbonization really mean? How does it manifest in communities? And so we started with a really large scan here. We looked at over 100 policies worldwide. We looked at over 150 examples of everything from buildings and practices to tools, guidance, resources, policies. And then we engaged with over 50 stakeholders, individuals from within the Climate Heritage Network and from our community advisory groups who have been really essential in kind of helping to collect all of the knowledge that exists within our community. And after synthesizing all of this, synthesizing all of what we found here, we were able to extrapolate or kind of distill 5 principles of heritage-informed decarbonization that are high-level messages that communicate the power of heritage to address decarbonization. The first of these is to learn from the greatest living laboratory for climate adaptation, which is the existing built environment. How do we read from the buildings, the places that we already have to understand how our built environment and the way we occupy it responds to the changing climate and helps to mitigate emissions? The second is about implementing place-based solutions, understanding the local materials, the local environment, and the local cultural practices that help us both build and maintain sustainably, but also live and inhabit our places sustainably. The third is to reframe building waste as a resource. How do we look at the materials and the products within our built environment as an asset rather than as something to be disposed of? And then not just, of course, at the material scale, but at the building scale, prioritizing building use, building reuse, and building care to extend the value of buildings over time and eliminate emissions. And then lastly, how do we drive inclusive decision making by integrating heritage and Indigenous voices directly into climate policy making, into governance, moving beyond a consultative approach to really embed that knowledge and to create policies that reflect the way people occupy spaces and build within their local context in order to make policies that are actually implementable and will achieve both the climate and the cultural outcomes that we need. So these five principles are sort of categories or a way to organize all of those approaches and examples that we collected, and five primary talking points. So these are the foundation of the Heritage Now campaign. These five principles. We tested them out last year. We brought them to COP30 in Belém, which is the UN's annual climate convening. And we had a number of signatories, of endorsers of these messages from across climate, design, heritage, nonprofit, a lot of different types of organizations, academic organizations coming together to support these messages, which we were able to bring into both the cultural heritage space, or really the culture space broadly, as well as the built environment space, to elevate the importance of these solutions that kind of cross over between cultural heritage and built environment decarbonization. So that is a bit about how we got here today. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Elizabeth to talk about how all of this is being put into the resource of the DBTH toolkit.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. And it's great to be with you all today. I work with Lori at the Built Buildings Lab as the policy lead, and I'm going to walk through some of the key resources that are included in this toolkit, which in addition to the campaign are the kind of two primary resources we have for this project. So the goal of this toolkit is really to support policymakers, practitioners, advocates, and community leaders in advancing heritage-informed decarbonization in their work and within their communities. Included within the toolkit is an overview of key policies, stakeholders, and approaches that advance this work and really bridge across the climate, heritage, and built environment sectors. A deeper dive into the five principles that Lori just outlined with context about why those matter today. Key policy levers that to integrate to advance this work, as well as prompts for thinking about how to take these global concepts and adapt them to the local community context. And then lastly, we have a set of 14 case studies to really dive deeper and to show how these projects, policies, programs manifest on the ground around the world. So if we can go to the next slide. So two of the key features that we really want to highlight that are included in the toolkit today are really the mechanisms for policy advancement, as well as examples of this work in action. And so since the aim, as Lori walked through, is really to prepare heritage advocates to advance this work in the climate space, is that we really wanted to identify what were the range of policy tools available to really succeed in this advocacy. And as I mentioned, throughout the toolkit, trying to bridge these three different sectors and create kind of a common set of language and understanding. And so when we think about, the policy tools available, often we may start and stop with thinking about what are the kind of regulatory tools that we have. And these are tools that set legally binding standards to drive innovation or to accelerate transitions. But there is a lot more available when it comes to advancing heritage-informed decarbonization. So this also includes economic tools which provide incentives to private industry to encourage alignment with public goals. Government and public investment. So this is the direct financial investment of governments into their own infrastructure, as well as research and development funding. We have information tools which work to disseminate information to promote certain technologies and behaviors, as well as property rights policies which protect certain environmental and cultural resources for an intended purpose over a set period of time. And so we wanted to be able to kind of showcase again the breadth of what's here, and how these different types of policies can be used within the context of each of these principles. So if we could go to the next slide. So included within the toolkit is a deeper dive into, again, each of the 5 principles. It includes information, again, about what are the kind of key priority policy levers, the cultural shift that's needed, how do we go from kind of the problem statement to implementation, as well as some sample policies from around the world, again, to demonstrate the breadth of policy tools that are available, as well as the stakeholders that are engaged in this work. And so for each principle, in addition to these kind of called out examples, we've identified where we see the best tools for action, whether it's regulations or incentives within the context of each of these principles. And so for me, I come from the climate advocacy space. And I think one of the most important takeaways I've had from the project is that there is no single path to advance this work. And it's really about ensuring that we meet communities, policymakers where they are, and kind of leverage and enter the space at that point, as opposed to thinking about what is kind of a new policy intervention. But it's really about using what we have, where we are in that stage to advance this work. So if we can go to the next slide. So in addition to these resources on policy advancement, we also wanted to provide high quality examples from around the world of these projects in action. And so included in the toolkit are 14 case studies that represent a diverse types of projects. We have buildings, practices, programs, initiatives, and policies. And as you can see from this visual, they kind of span across all 5 of these principles, and across kind of all facets of the definition that we've put forth of what heritage-informed decarbonization is. So in going from that 150 plus examples of projects to narrow down to this 14, is we wanted to ensure these projects were first in alignment with the principles of heritage-informed decarbonization, which is visualized here. We wanted to understand what the community impact was of these projects and to ensure that these projects were advancing and meeting local needs, as well as ensuring that these projects were relevant to communities and transferable to communities around the world. And so while each case might not be directly relevant to you, the goal here is that a number of them are, and they just showcase the breadth of not only, as I said, about what policies are available, but the breadth of how this work is done on the ground. So just to give you kind of a brief idea of what's included here. We'll go over two of the cases high level. So the first is Masons Inc., which is a design and construction firm, a women-owned design and construction firm based in India that really seeks to overcome two community misconceptions about this work. First is that traditional vernacular architecture and traditional, bio-based materials are viewed in the region as outdated or not innovative in present day, as well as addressing a gap that the construction industry sees in the region where women aren't able to advance into construction fields. And so this firm is really working to elevate these materials and architectural strategies as innovative, as culturally relevant, and as critically important for environmental protection, while also addressing this gender gap in the field. And so I think this case does a great job of showcasing that each of these cases that we feature have additional co-benefits beyond just the emissions reductions associated with these strategies or other heritage or built environment metrics, that it's really these co-benefits that ground these projects in community and are really important frameworks for advancing this work. So we can go to the next slide. So the other to showcase is a policy from San Antonio, the San Antonio Reuse Program, which was started through a deconstruction and salvage ordinance passed in San Antonio, which requires that buildings of a certain age be deconstructed and the materials be salvaged and reused, as opposed to seeing these buildings demolished. A unique feature of this program in San Antonio is that they've included a lot of investment in developing a workforce pipeline to ensure that they have trained practitioners in deconstruction. And this also really stems from a grassroots community advocacy campaign over concerns about affordable housing being demolished in place of either other higher end housing and the public health concerns associated with that demolition. And so again, this is a case of looking at this on the ground community concern and how this deconstruction ordinance has really emerged to address a number of the co-benefits associated with the program. So again, these are very high-level overviews of these cases, but our next webinar, which is on July 16th, we're actually going to do a deep dive into some of the cases and hear directly from our partners on those projects. And then in August, we also are going to do a deep dive in how to leverage the toolkit to advance policy. So again, speaking to both of these kind of key elements in the toolkit moving forward. But I'm going to pause there and turn it back over to Jim.
Okay, perfect. Why don't you back up that slide one more? Thank you. Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Lori, for that great overview of the campaign and particularly that new decarbonizing the built environment through heritage toolkits. Very exciting. I think it's just going to be a great resource. So congratulations to both of you and the Built Buildings Lab team and collaborators. And I hope everyone will dig into the toolkit and explore some of the inspiring examples that are highlighted. Okay, now next slide. So the toolkit and the policy examples that it highlights demonstrate how historic preservation and heritage practices more broadly are in fact key strategies for effective climate action. And that, despite some media reports to the contrary, I don't know if anybody has this experience, heritage advocates actually share common goals with those working to make our built environment more energy efficient, to reduce carbon emissions, and to sustain our communities around the globe. Next slide. So we at the National Trust are very pleased to be one of the partners in the Heritage Now campaign, finding common ground and strengthening connections between preservation and sustainability policies and practices are all part of our Resilient Heritage Initiative at the National Trust. And we have a report coming out later this summer that focuses on those connections, evaluating more than 25 state and local policies in particular, and offering recommendations for policy innovations with a focus on 6 policy priority areas that you see listed here. This includes the evaluation of established long-standing policies that could be modified and enhanced to encourage building reuse and retrofitting, like building codes, as well as areas where newer policies could become more widespread, like deconstruction ordinances, and what they've been doing in San Antonio being such an inspiring example. Next slide. So I want to highlight just briefly, just 2 examples that illustrate what is in the report. So yeah, now go ahead, thanks. So South Carolina is a place where there's some innovation that's been going on, and it really offers a great example of policy that encourages reuse, which is one of the ways that we can avoid carbon emissions is reusing existing buildings rather than replacing them and incurring all those emissions that occur when a new building was constructed. So in South Carolina, they have a 25% abandoned buildings tax credit. Some of you may know about this. It's for properties that have been vacant, more than 2/3 vacant for at least 5 years, and has been used for creative projects in towns of all sizes around the state, including this former airplane hangar that is now a brewery, museum, and event space. And both South and North Carolina also offer tax incentives that spur reuse of vacant mill buildings. Again, 2, I think, interesting innovations at the state level that broaden the incentives for building reuse across their states. In this idea of offering incentives that focus on underused and vacant there we go. Underused and vacant building types has gained traction in state legislatures in the past few years in particular, where there are many states dealing with a growing concern about vacant and underused office buildings. So several states, including Missouri, have developed legislation to support housing conversions for large underused commercial structures in major cities, as well as, in some cases, smaller upper floor conversions along small town main streets. So advocating for incentives that spur building reuse more broadly, like these policies do, is one of the ways that I think preservation and heritage groups can collaborate with sustainability and energy efficiency advocates. We can also engage with policies that focus on making building operations more efficient. So next slide. Some of you may know that there is a new and highly impactful policy out there aimed at reducing operating emissions called Building Performance Standards, or BPS policies. We had a webinar with the American Planning Association on this just at the end of last month, and we've got a blog post on this from our policy consultant, Sean Denniston, that gets into this on Preservation Leadership Forum. BPS policies function like energy codes, but they apply to existing buildings. So not just those that are newly constructed or undergoing major renovations. So they typically apply to larger commercial buildings, setting targets for reductions in energy use and/or carbon emissions, typically ratcheting down, becoming more stringent over time. The map on the left shows how the adoption of building performance standards has spread across the country in the last few years. According to data collected by the Institute for Market Transformation, 21 counties, states, and cities have adopted a BPS so far, and about twice as many are committed to future adoption. So this is a new policy, it's growing, it has a big impact. For example, on the right illustration from Midtown Manhattan, New York City implemented local law 97 in 2019. That's their building performance standard, and it applies to somewhere close to 50,000 buildings across the city of New York, including many older and historic structures. So our report includes recommendations for how preservation, energy efficiency, and climate advocates can work together to better integrate preservation principles and practices into these new PPS policies. So, for example, rather than seeking exemptions, as we have sometimes done in the past related to energy codes, our report recommends ways to develop flexible compliance paths that allow the owners of historic buildings to still meet these BPS targets for energy and carbon emissions while respecting and conserving historic buildings and their features and integrity. So those are just two quick examples that illustrate what's in this forthcoming report. Stay connected with us through Preservation Leadership Forum and look for that report later this summer. Hope to share that broadly. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lori now to dig into more examples and hopefully global examples through conversation with some of our other speakers here about decarbonization through heritage initiatives around the globe. Lori?
All right. Thanks, Jim. Sorry about the screen blip. I was trying to get everyone the correct link there. And I'm actually going to pass it to Jenny. So we have Jenny Hay here, the North American Secretariat for the Climate Heritage Network, who is going to help kind of bring some of these global ideas down to the local through conversation with a few of our key project participants. So Jenny, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori. And another quick shout out to the National Trust, Architecture 2030, and of course the Built Buildings Lab for being such wonderful partners in this effort. We couldn't be where we are without all of us working together and collaborating. So I'm going to invite a couple of my colleagues to join me, Marianelle and Mokolade, if you want to go ahead and turn on your cameras and jump in. So we're just going to spend a few minutes in conversation here. I am going to just give you both a heads up that I'm going to ask you to introduce your organizations and then talk a little bit about what heritage-informed decarbonization work looks like for you. But I'll give you a minute to think about it while I introduce the Climate Heritage Network. So if you haven't heard of the Climate Heritage Network, we are a global community of cultural institutions, historic sites, governments, communities, artists, scholars, and of course, architects who are asking a small, simple, but radical question. What if culture isn't just impacted by climate change, but is essential to solving it? We know that cultural heritage connects people at our most human level and turns climate projections into lived human stories. And the Climate Heritage Network gives you the tools to amplify that role, including global collaboration, practical resources, and a platform to make heritage part of climate policy conversations. So in answer to the second question regarding the heritage-informed decarbonization work, the project that led us to the Heritage Now campaign, which I know Lori and Jim have talked about, the Decarbonizing the Built Environment Through Heritage project, is actually one piece of a comprehensive Climate Heritage Network initiative called Imagining Low Carbon, Just, Climate Resilient Futures Through Culture and Heritage. This work was generously funded by the Mellon Foundation and the 1772 Foundation, and it includes projects to catalyze action around culture-based climate strategies through adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. These projects have resulted in connecting thousands of communities across the globe to build a stronger network that can affect policy change at scale from the local to the international. If you're not already a member of the Climate Heritage Network, I would like to personally invite you and your institution to join us as we leverage this transformational effort and imagine a new future for the Climate Heritage Network. And with that, I am very happy to hand it over to Marianelle, if you don't mind telling us a little about your organization and talk about the heritage-informed decarbonization work there in New Orleans.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jenny. And thanks to all the previous speakers for including me on this webinar. And my name is Marianelle Nolan-Wheatley. I'm the Advocacy and Education Director at the Preservation Resource Center in New Orleans. I had the pleasure of serving as a community advisor for the Decarbonizing the Built Environment Through Heritage portion of the project, and just want to congratulate everyone on all the incredible work putting together the toolkit. So a little background on the Preservation Resource Center. We are a nonprofit in New Orleans. Our mission is to help preserve and protect historic architecture, neighborhoods, and the cultural identity of the city. And we do this through a combination of education and advocacy work and also programming. And both of those sort of arms of our organization work together and inform each other. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But just a little bit of background on the organization itself. New Orleans was really an early pioneer in historic preservation. We are proud to say that we have the second oldest historic district in the country. The French Quarter was established as a historic district in 1936, and it sort of codified the idea of the tout ensemble, basically the idea that all together buildings in unity, a neighborhood of buildings, sort of take on a greater significance even than the individual buildings themselves. And so that sort of set the stage that, really a sort of cultural focus on the value of historic buildings in New Orleans. In 1974, the PRC was founded essentially to bring attention to the value of historic buildings in the city. And really the very founding of the organization is tied to heritage-informed decarbonization. Our first headquarters was actually in a vacant and dilapidated 1830s row house. It was actually a row of 13 properties in the sort of downtown warehouse district. It wasn't really referred to it at that point as the warehouse district. It was really, sort of a vacant neighborhood at that point. And the PRC moved into one of these buildings and restored it. And that essentially inspired others to follow suit. So other people purchased the neighboring properties, and eventually all 13 were restored. And that sort of started a trend of revitalization for the entire neighborhood and brought attention to the cultural and architectural significance of historic buildings in New Orleans, as well as prioritizing this idea of the value of reusing buildings. There was a very practical side to this as well, which of course is that the city's historic architecture is a huge draw. So we, this sort of prompted the creation of historic districts in the city. We now have 50,000 historic buildings that are regulated by local historic districts. But really, our education, advocacy, and programming work is all geared towards bringing attention to why buildings are built the way they are here. And it's because of the climate, it's because of ventilation. Historic buildings are built on piers so that they do not flood during storm events. The high quality of construction materials that are resilient, and sort of this idea that buildings that are still here because they have survived. They have stood the test of time. And it's sort of, I'll just close with a line I heard recently, which is, it's not good because it's old because it's good. And that just sort of speaks to the quality of these materials.
Oh, wow, Mary Nell, that was fantastic. I love that. I think I will steal that saying. What a wonderful representation of the work that we do. Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mokolede Johnson, who is joining us from Lagos. And I am very happy to ask him to introduce his wonderful organization and then tell us a little bit about the heritage-informed decarbonization work that he's been leading.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. Hope you can hear me clearly. Yeah.
Yes, we
Thank
can.
you, everyone. Yeah. I'm actually in Nairobi, Kenya today, while I'm based in Lagos, West Africa. This is East Africa. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share. I'm Mokolade Johnson, and I head the Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub based in the University of Lagos. And it's been a very exciting ride in terms of how we connect with cultural practices about decarbonization. So I'm doing that for the Africa arm of the CHN, the Climate Heritage Network. So it's been a very educative ride, with Laurie and Billy working closely together on decarbonization of the built environment, and Jenny on the call too. So I would like to just share quickly decarbonization from our end, especially from the cultural perspectives in Lagos is a little bit different from what you will have, in other parts of the world, because heritage itself is a localized idea. It's a localized concept, and it means that what is important in location A might not be that important in B. So, from the cultural perspective of the indigenous people in the Southwest Nigeria, West Africa, decarbonization has always been in their cultural practices and methods, due to their own belief systems and what they do. So the idea of the heritage informed decarbonization comes into light when you talk about how it's being practiced here, and with such other unintended benefits that you can get from their own cultural practices, is part of their own their system of regulating. There's that regulating method that comes into play, because these practices are widespread in the population of an ethnic group that is about 45 million, spreads across geopolitical zones of other countries in West Africa too. So I've been leading that kind of initiative, and also looking at how that spreads across the whole of Africa, the indigenous practices that help decarbonization. And so we've come up with what I call the Heritage Tree Initiative, where we're trying to encourage the local population to be able to use, those practices that were embedded in culture, to revive them in contemporary times, and see how that one can help us regulate the distressed urban climatic conditions that we have, especially in this era of climate change uncertainties. So it's been what we have case studies on, and also making sure that we find a way to abstract knowledge from such indigenous cultural practices, and find a way to overlay them in the contemporary urban scenarios that we have in Lagos and other cities across Africa. We've done one or two publications that are under review, that you'll be able to highlight more, and also see the practicality in the decarbonization methods that are peculiar to the indigenous peoples of Africa as a whole. So our research hub is based in the University of Lagos, and finding how we can also embed this in the curriculum, and see how we can also make sure that this kind of initiative is transmitted through education and training, both in pedagogy and in practices, and also making sure that we're able to groom younger emerging practitioners to be able to follow in the revival of this kind of cultural initiatives, because you will not need to drive policy hardly if it is a principle that is already entrenched in the culture of the people. So it's something that I know from having been an indigenous a practitioner here, something that I know will be able to gain enough traction to make it a success. So on that, we've been looking at how to put that in our university curriculums and teach it in some of the courses that are related to, heritage preservation, as we have it in the university. So that's a bit about the decarbonization heritage ideas that we have as being driven by the Climate Heritage Network and the decarbonization group in this on this platform. So I want to stop there. I will be responding to other questions. Jenny, thank you for the time.
That's wonderful, Mokolade. Thank you so much for sharing. I know the work that you are doing is so critical, and I especially love the engagement with students. I think that is crucial in passing down our knowledge. I'm going to ask another question of Mary Nell, but Mokolade, before I let you go, will you tilt your camera up just slightly so that we can see the top of your face?
Sorry.
Thank you. Perfect. Sorry. All right. So I have a question. Oh yeah, I have a question for you, Mary Nell, if you will give us a little bit of insight into New Orleans. And you have already sort of led us into thinking about the concept of tout ensemble and the importance of what New Orleans has done through preservation. But I think a lot of us would be interested in hearing how your community is experiencing climate change, what is happening in the physical buildings, what is happening in the built environment, and how that relates to this decarbonization effort.
So climate change, of course, is always top of mind here in New Orleans. And the climate, since time immemorial, this climate has been one of the greatest challenges of this location. Moisture, of course, which we have so much of here, is a huge threat to historic buildings. So we've always experienced severe weather, but of course the sort of severe weather has become much more a part of everyday life. So now major rain events, we get street flooding on a regular basis. We experience extreme heat for many months out of the year. And we also experience other severe weather events like tornadoes and things like that, which really were not associated with New Orleans in previous decades. But one of the greatest threats that climate change has brought is actually the fact that insurance rates have gone up so much, that housing in New Orleans is largely unaffordable due to the rising insurance costs. And there really just aren't enough insurance providers. So, there of course are ways to use vernacular building styles and designs to help combat some of these weather events, but the sort of extreme climate crisis and insurance crisis that we're facing now also requires that we adapt. And we also need sort of large scale change to bring down those insurance rates. So fortified roofs are one way that we can do that here. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a special, basically fortified roofs is a building standard that uses specialized materials and installation techniques to create very resilient roofing systems that can withstand severe weather. And we now have a state-funded grant program, a lottery system that opens 2 or 3 times a year that can help provide $10,000 grants to individuals to put a fortified roof on their home. And actually, we were able to receive funding from Travelers Insurance and the National Trust that allowed us to partner with the Louisiana Department of Insurance to provide the gap funding, because many fortified roofs cost more than that $10,000 amount. And so we're able to provide that gap funding to essentially help people to complete the cost of a fortified roof. And once we get sort of a large number of fortified roofs in the area, that will hopefully help to bring down insurance costs more regionally. And so that's sort of, one way that we are hoping to see some improvement in the near future.
Thank you so much, Mariel. That was really useful and very practical. I know New Orleans is not the only community that is facing the challenges related to insurance, and insuring historic buildings obviously is critical, again, in preserving them for the future. So I wonder, Mokolade, if you will come back for just a moment, could I ask you a question before we pivot over to our Q&A?
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could share a little bit about the kind of knowledge that is being used within the communities that you're working with, and how that knowledge has connections with the past through the built environment.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jenny. That's a very good perspective to look at it again. There's a concept that has been already been entrenched in culture here, and that is through the religious practices that used to be the usual thing in the past. I'm talking about 100, 150 years ago, where parcels of forest land are reserved for religious purposes in the past. And due to a lot of historical occurrences, such practices have been largely abandoned. And it was usual practice that in those reserved religious forests, which is a part of their heritage culture, the trees, the green forests are not, you cannot cut down the tree for any reason, whether it's commercial or private. You also cannot just go into hunt for games. So it's on the long run, it became a rich biodiversity kind of heritage for them, and such it has, and because it's usual practice, it has been like that for centuries. It was able to regulate their climate in such a way that it contributed to the very low carbon footprint in the region. So it is usual to find this kind of practice in the over 45 million Southwest Nigerian Yoruba ethnic zone. So today you'll find that a lot of those practices have been abandoned. So the concept that we are trying to bring up today, especially using Lagos as a critical example, is that it is a city of about 22 million inhabitants, and largely already distressed by the issues of deforestation, and those cultural practices have been done away with. And therefore, you find a street about 2 kilometers, you won't find a single tree. And those are the things that we have, and that's why, the cultural totem trees that used to be part of city landscape has been abandoned also. So from the decarbonization perspective and the concept that we have in heritage trees adoption for this toolkit, the case study is to bring back those totem trees in the layout of our streets, where people are encouraged to adopt a tree, as one of the ways of regreening the city and making sure that we contribute or create new amenities that will help decarbonization. So these are the things that we are trying to revive through the DBTH project in our part of the world, especially in Africa. And this kind of practice is common. It's common to, you find it in Kenya, you find it in Ghana, you find it in many coastal countries of Africa, where cultural practices, became platforms on which heritage forests are preserved and contributes in such a large way to decarbonizing their environment. And but nowadays, that practice has already gone down. We are trying to abstract from the cultural practice of the past and see what we can use it for in modern times, and contribute to stability in the climate scenarios that we have. Jenny?
Wow, that is a fascinating response, Mokolade. Thank you, and really demonstrates the deeply interconnected world of the built environment and infrastructure with culture and, of course, the natural environment. Thank you. So from here, I think I will hand it over to Lori, who I think is going to navigate through some Q&A for us.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really great conversation. I think we have maybe time for just one or two questions. And one is for Mary Nell about your experience dealing with kind of giving up in the face of climate change. And maybe I would kind of also add to this question about planned retreat and being on the front lines of climate change down there. How are you thinking about that from a cultural heritage preservation perspective?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of attention around this recently after the Tulane study was released, and I think it is a concern, of course, for people, but there's so much reason to stay and work with what we have, and the built environment here is such an important backdrop for the cultural identity of the city. And one really feeds the other. So I think that, it can be a very daunting thing for sure. But I think overall, there's a lot of resilience here, and people want to stay. I mean, it's people's home. People have lived here for generations, and there's a huge amount of cultural identity and significance in that regard. So,
Thanks, Marielle. All right, I appreciate that, and I also answered in the Q&A. But there's as another part of this Imagining Futures grant through the Climate Heritage Network, there's a parallel effort focused on resilience and adaptation of cultural sites using heritage knowledge and practices. And they are also kind of launching a longer term campaign and engagement, and that's called Heritage Adapts. So I would encourage folks to check that out. And both of those initiatives are actually part of the UNFCCC's Global Climate Action agenda, which means that as you're signing on to Heritage now, as you're participating in these campaigns, you're helping to demonstrate up to really high-level policymakers that these solutions exist and that they're really important to not just tackle climate change, but to do it in a way that makes a world that we all want to continue living in. So I wanted to add that before we close. And then, Jim, do you want to come back and wrap us up here? And I can share those slides.
Yes, thanks, Lori. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this first of our series of webinars on this global campaign to foster decarbonization and heritage-informed decarbonization strategies. Our next webinar is a month from now, July 16th, and this is going to be a chance to really dig into some of the examples that are mentioned in the toolkit. You saw just a little bit of a preview of that. So that'll be July 16th, and then we'll look at how to implement policies in our August webinar, August 18th. So I hope everyone will join us for that. And then finally, last slide, just stay tuned, stay connected through Preservation Leadership Forum. All of our upcoming webinars are listed there and other resources. And take a look at the YouTube channel as well if you want to review this session or others that are coming. And just finally, thanks so much to all of our panelists and speakers. Inspiring to hear. I hope everyone will feel inspired as well and join this campaign and join us for our upcoming webinars. So thanks everybody for being with us today.